And there's like 4 or 5 police officers. And all of them have weapons out. One of them has a shotgun. The others have pistols, and there's a dog. And they're shining flashlights in my face and pointing guns at me and telling me to get on the ground. Welcome to the Side by Side podcast. My name is Michael, and I want to thank you so much for tuning in.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We gotta work on the problems. We gotta link up to solve them. We gotta keep on evolving. Gotta be side by side. Give it up. Gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side. Yeah. We gotta be side by side. Gotta be side by side. We gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side.
You know, today we're going to do something different. When I started this podcast, the intention was to sit down with people that I respected, with people with perspectives that were different than mine, or maybe sometimes aligned, but to grow and evolve. Because whether we acknowledge it or not, we grow when we sit together. We mature in our spirit, and ultimately, we mature in our hearts when we share those conversations and talk about difficult things, also important things in our lives. But today we're going to do things a little bit differently. We're going to have a solo podcast because there's some things on my mind, as I'm sure there are things on your mind. So again, I want to thank you for tuning in, and I hope you stick around for the conversation. I embarked on this mission of a daily devotional. So that means every single day I put out a video of some sort that includes a scripture and then some sort of hopefully motivational or inspirational tie-in to that scripture. The idea is that through doing the devotionals, we all don't have the capacity that it used to have, maybe, where you could just buy a devotional book and work through that book, or God forbid, even just grab the Bible yourself and work through your own personal reading. The truth is, a lot of us don't have that capacity anymore because life is so compressed. And I won't make the excuse necessarily that we don't have the capacity, but the truth is there are more things going on right now in our lives than there were 10 or 20 years ago. The truth is our lives have become more compressed with all of the places that we need to be, all of the things that we need to do, that sometimes you just don't have the bandwidth to open a book and work through a devotional. You have to be intentional about creating that space. And there's a beauty to the idea of being able to pull up a video on any of the social medias that you use and just watch for 45 seconds or 50 seconds. And hopefully through that, through hearing the word and ultimately a message that ties into that word, that you might carry it with you through the course of the day. That's the first piece of that daily devotional project. But the second piece is an accountability thing for me. I've got so many plates spinning in my life that it's really difficult to be consistent with anything. It's difficult to be consistent going to the gym every single day and taking that time to put myself first because of all the obligations that I have in my day-to-day life. And that's not to make an excuse. That's just to say that's a maturation that has to happen in order to put yourself first. So I decided to embark on this daily devotional project to see if I could be consistent with something. You know, there's 365 days in the year, and it takes a lot of effort and work even just to make one devotional video. It may only be a minute long, but by the time you record all the bits and begin the video editing and the posting and all of that, I mean, there's a significant time investment in each of those videos. But I wanted to see if I could be consistent for 365 days. And I think today is day 64 or something like that. And in many ways, it's the hardest thing that I've ever done, to be consistent in that way. You try to stay ahead as much as possible, but life be lifing, right? It's difficult to be in that space. I know last night, I didn't have any videos planned or prepped for this coming week. I posted my very last video that morning, and I told my wife, I said, Jamila, I don't have any videos left, so I'm going to have to put in some significant work tonight. And I did. You crank out a couple videos and you kick that ball down the field a little bit. But there's nothing quite as good as feeling as though you've accomplished something. That consistency, right? That no matter what, I chose myself today. And I'm sure there's places in your life where you could be choosing yourself, that you're ultimately choosing all the other things, whether that be your family, whether that be your obligations at work, whether that be community obligations. I'm sure there's places where you should be putting yourself first, where you should be putting those goals and those aspirations, and also just the consistency for you, that you should be putting it first and you're just not. But there's multiple layers to it. The first layer is, can you be consistent, rain or shine? Can you be consistent no matter how you feel, no matter what's going on in your life? And if you can prove yourself that you can show up in those moments, even for something small, what big things can you show up for? We like to jump to those really big places immediately, right? Well, I'm going to work out every single day for the entire year. Well, the truth is you're probably not going to go from 0 to 100. If you haven't been working out at all, the reality is it's probably not going to be a goal that you actually accomplish. But if you can prove that you can show up for yourself in those little ways and be consistent about it, be diligent and dedicated about it, to be disciplined about it, I think there's a lot to be said about what it does for your spirit and letting you know that you can do even more than your mind or your heart thinks that you can. But another component of this daily devotional project is I had to post the videos. There's lots of people that have really big followings and social media managers and all those kind of things. But, I'm certainly not in that space. So I got to do the work of posting the videos. And it's exhausting in many ways. I know there's great ways that you can do some planning and scheduled posts. And it works one way on this service and another way on this service. And I know there's things that you can probably pay for that do all the posting at once. But the unfortunate thing with doing those things yourself is it's really difficult not to get sucked in, right? Social media is this suck. Ultimately, there's not a lot of positive social media, or at least not where I see it. A lot of it is this kind of negative misery, and it just like pulls you down, and it's like, get down here, right? And when you have to make a post and you're sitting there waiting for it to upload, it's difficult not to scroll, to do that doom scroll, and you just encounter negativity. You only have to get 1 or 2 posts away from something great to find something incredibly terrible, right? People bashing each other, people putting each other down. And I thought when the election was over that we would somehow be past it, but it seems like we're still just wading around in mud. And a couple weeks ago, the lectionary scripture that came up was a really awesome one from Luke. And frankly, it's one I think we kind of just skip over. I think we pretend like this isn't the essence of the gospel. But the truth is, in more ways than one, it kind of is the essence of the gospel. And so we kind of cherry pick the verses that we want to use. But the language is incredibly clear. And I love that. I appreciate the consistency of the gospel. that doesn't shy around difficult conversations, that doesn't shy around accountability, and that certainly doesn't consider how difficult it might be to follow. It just is. And that's the way that love exists in our lives. It just is. And so right there in Luke chapter 6, he says there's trouble ahead when you live only for the approval of others, saying what flatters them, doing what indulges them. Popularity contests are not truth contests. Look at how many scoundrel preachers were approved by your ancestors. Your task is to be true, not popular. And to you who are ready for the truth, I say this: love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the energies of prayer for that person. If someone slaps you in the face, stand there and take it. If someone grabs your shirt, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. If someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit for tat stuff. Live generously. The passage continues on, and it's difficult. You know, much of the gospel is that way, right? Incredibly simple on the surface, but to actually live that life, to actually apply it to your life, well, that's the rub. That's where it suddenly becomes a little bit difficult to carry the weight of that love on your shoulders, on your back, and not be overly concerned or worried about what people think of you. Just to be love and to be light, even when it's inconvenient. And that's not what you see when you open up social media, is it? We spend our time knocking everyone down a peg or two. And I get it. I get it. There's certainly people that are walking around as though they are high or mighty. And it's difficult to watch that sometimes, right? People that you know are just people that are walking around with this high view of themselves, even when they might not have the moral high ground in one way or another. But how do we receive those people? Is it with love? You know, even in the places where Jesus chastised people, there was loving correction. And love comes before the correction. Do we want to just jump ahead to the correction? But it's really hard to clean a fish before you get it in the boat. The truth is that we're supposed to allow people to bring out the best in us. And I really wonder sometimes if we do that thoughtful reflection, if we have that introspection to know whether people are bringing out the best or if they're drawing out the worst of us. When you look around, it feels like what we see is the worst. We allow our fears and our worries to dictate everything about what we do in this life. And we have legitimate worries. We have legitimate fears about the future that we leave our children. We are raised in a society that teaches us lack, that ultimately teaches us that there's somehow a scarcity in this world. But my friends, there's not. To stand with God is to make the impossible possible. And in that place, there isn't lack. In that place, there isn't scarcity. That same God that could walk on water, that same God that could turn a little bit of food into enough to feed 5,000, that same God that could turn water into wine can make enough in our lives. Enough to go around. No. The truth is, my friends, the one thing that is scarce in this world is love. There just doesn't seem to be enough of it. certainly not enough to go around. And we're all trying to nibble off this little parcel of love that's left instead of contributing to it. We expect grace when we're unwilling and, in some ways, unable to give it back. And we think our unwavering support of political movements or social movements or cultural movements gives us some moral high ground. And frankly, it doesn't matter which side that you're on. The truth is, life is 360, right? 360 degrees, and it doesn't matter if you're in this 90 or you're in that 90 or that 90 or the other 90. It does not matter. Life is full circle. But we love to put ourselves in these camps, right? Oh, I'm conservative or I'm liberal. But Jesus was far more interested in the other side. What lies in that other 180 degrees? Beyond partisan bickering, beyond our hatred and moral inequity, Jesus was concerned with the heart of man. The spirit that dwells inside. And my friends, it doesn't matter what your political leanings are. It doesn't matter your cultural or societal standing. Your spirit needs help. There are cracks in your spirit that you haven't even begun to acknowledge or understand. And with this breakneck pace that we take in life, it's really difficult to even have the capacity to begin the healing process. And so enters Jesus into our lives, the one that allows light to shine through those cracks in our spirit. But the ultimate healing that happens in that space is not just light shining through those cracks, but light that permeates beyond our bodies, beyond our spirits, to the world that lies ahead. My friends, if we're not lamp bearers of that light, if we're not carriers of that hope, then what are we doing? The call on our lives is that love might bring out the best in us, not the worst. And I wonder if we're doing just the opposite. Some of that moral high ground that we reach for, I have to question if it's in an effort for people to look highly upon us. Everybody wants to be celebrated. Everybody wants to leave a legacy. Everybody wants to mean something. And to have purpose in life is important. It's imperative for our mental, for our spiritual. But I ask, do you remember the person that taught you with humility and grace? Or do you remember the person that scolded you, that berated you, that made you feel like you weren't enough? The truth is probably that we remember both people, right? But for two different reasons. And so maybe it's time that we stop this pursuit of being remembered and single in on why we want to be remembered. I doubt anyone is going to remember us because we stood on our moral high ground and we pumped our fist and we shouted louder than all the people around us. I think they're going to remember us for something far more personal, the lives that we lived. Our faith should be far more internal than it really is. We tend to jump up on the soapbox and allow everybody to see us, right? We don't pray in private, we pray in public. We want to be seen. But I'm not sure how important it is that everyone knows what our faith looks like. I'm not sure that it's important that everyone knows that we're a good person. Maybe it's enough that your spouse knows you're a good person. Maybe it's enough that your children know that you're a good person. Maybe it's enough that your friends and those that you've come into contact with over the year knows that you're a good person. Maybe it's enough that those that watch your life know that you're a good person. And maybe it's not so important that we tell the world, look at me, I'm a good person. It's certainly not the model that Jesus left us. They always used to say that if you want to know a person, you should look at their kids. And there's probably some truth to that, you know. I've had enough time with our 4-year-old, about to be 5, to know that he exemplifies some of the best qualities of his mother and I, but also some of the worst qualities. And parenting is probably the hardest thing that I'll ever do. And I think that's because it's the most important thing that I'll probably ever do. Because it means something to me to raise a person that cares, that loves, that is purposeful with his actions, with his words, that lives a life of substance, quality over quantity. And that's hard stuff because it requires you to model all those behaviors. And we're human. We all have these moments where we sink below our own expectations, right? And those little eyes are just always watching. But I really enjoy the time that I get to spend with my son and my daughter, because it draws out this like vulnerability and transparency, because they're blunt and they're honest and they're just watching everything. And there's a beauty to being able to communicate in that way. There's a beauty to be able to like strip off the stress of day-to-day life and just be present with my children. And maybe that's a walk. Maybe that's laying on the floor and playing with magnetiles or building something. Maybe that's just jumping around and having a dance party with my little girl, or tickling and smiling and laughing. Maybe that's just all of us snuggled in the bed together, knowing that we're going to get rest and respite, and that we're going to be together in the way that we're supposed to be together. All as one. But it seems like society pulls us away from that. You know, my son, when it's time for me to leave, go to work, he asks, you know, Dad, are you going to go to work? And do you have to go? You know, it's those moments that just tug on your heartstrings, because more often than not, I don't want to go. Yeah, I talk with him, and I told him, you know, just the other day, you know, hanging out with you is my favorite thing in the entire world. And if I could just hang out with you and play with you and laugh and snuggle and do all the things that we get to do, I would do that. I would choose that for eternity, right? But there's other things in life that you just got to take care of. And sometimes they're inconvenient. More often than not, they're inconvenient, right? But it's tough because when you're in that place of transparency, when you're in that place of vulnerability and connection, really more than anything with your family, you want more. And I don't believe or trust any man or woman that would say that in that space they don't want more, because you do. But then what happens? Monday rolls around. And I was reading somewhere that the average man, the average dad, he spends 63 minutes a day with their children. 63 minutes a day. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not enough. That's essentially 7 hours every single week that men get to spend with their kids. And it's not enough. It's not enough to know them. It's not enough to raise them and support them and encourage them, but that's what we get. And some of that comes down to society, right? We've become the society that is so economically driven that we're dependent upon people being in the workforce day in and day out, and that daily grind, right? And like it or not, we've emerged in this society to where I wonder how much time moms get to spend with their kids. I mean, imagine that you're in a 2-income household where both parents are working, and kids wake up in the morning and you're getting them dressed and feeding them something quickly so that you can get them off to the bus stop or drive them to school or to daycare so that you can go work for your 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 hours a day. And then they're either getting bused back home before you get home, or they're going to after school programs, and then you're picking them up from school or daycare or after school programs, and you're hurriedly trying to get dinner on the table and go through the bedtime routines and make sure that homework is done, and then off to sleep, and then we do it all over again. And how much time do we get in the midst of that? How much time do we get to connect? Do we get to know the heart of our children? And I'm so incredibly blessed that my wife is at home, and I recognize that is a blessing. And I wonder what I wouldn't give for that to be the case, because she gets to mold them in a way that I don't have the capacity to do right now. And she gets to put our stamp on them. And she gets to know them in a way that maybe I don't. But to have that touch, it's important. And I don't think there's a dad or a mom that wouldn't want more. I don't think that there's teachers, administrators, or daycare workers, or babysitters, or anybody that wouldn't want more. I think about all the teachers that supported me when I was in school, the way that they cared and considered my feelings and what was going on in my life, the way that they supported. And I think about all those teachers and the kids that they had, the kids that they were only getting to see a couple hours a day, the sacrifices they were making in order to make an impact on my life. And it makes me question how we spend those moments. I'm as guilty as anybody of picking up the phone and scrolling or answering text messages or doing a call here or there and getting distracted. But if I only have 63 minutes a day, are they going to be quality minutes? Am I going to be uninterrupted in my focus? Am I going to be committed and invested in my children's lives? got to be. And that's certainly a place where I know I can grow. And I'm sure it's a place where you can grow. But if our perspective maybe shifts away from this lack mindset or this scarcity mindset of, I've only got this amount of time and it's just, my predicament is terrible and I hate it, and move to a place of, first of all, appreciation, but then maybe maximize that time. That it might be the best 30 minutes of our entire week. Getting to spend some really great time with my kids this weekend. That's probably going to be the best time of my week, The time that fuels me for those tough moments, for those long and kind of arduous moments. But it requires a presence, right? That we not be 1 foot firmly planted in the past and 1 foot firmly planted in the future, but that we might be grounded here in the present. And that's one of the places I think we could commit. Not only to creating space for that connection with our families, but also maximizing that moment. Even if it's smaller than what you would like, even if it's more infrequent than what you would like, that you maximize the time that you get, because you just don't know when that clock is going to run out. And having watched it run out for so many people, that's somewhere we got to be more conscious. And that certainly starts with me, all fingers pointing back at me. I don't know if it was Oprah, maybe she was quoting somebody else, but I heard this quote that changing your perspective on a situation is the key to improving it. And maybe that's it. Maybe it is those great challenges in our lives, those places where we just kind of see those deep, dark corners and we just don't see any tunnel or any hope out of it, that we're able to shift that perspective. And maybe it does improve. I'm optimistic. And that's, if I'm really honest, if I'm transparent, and that's the space that we're in right now, I've evolved in my perspective. I grew up I wouldn't call myself pessimistic, but I would consider myself a realist, right? And if we're honest, every realist is really a little bit pessimistic, right? I wasn't an optimist by any stretch of the imagination. I just was kind of matter of fact about things. But the older that I've gotten and having children and a family, you start to look at things a little bit more optimistically. And I've got hope. I really do. For what's next for our country, for what's next for our society as it continues to evolve. There's certainly places of concern. But I think there is a way out. And I think that all starts with that perspective shift. And coaching kids over all of these different years, and watching adults year after year after year, I think the biggest thing that we lack is resiliency. And I don't think anybody would raise their hand and just say, I'm weak. But we kind of are. I'm the first person to sit here and say there are so many avenues where I am weak, where I fall short of even my expectations for myself. But resiliency is not tied up in the stumble or the trip or even the fall. It's tied up in what we do on the other side. And the resiliency is the willingness to get back up. It's the willingness to try, even though there's a great chance that you might fail. But is the pursuit worth the effort? I think more often than not it is. And maybe that is my newfound optimism creeping out, that the pursuit might be worth it. But unless we develop more resilient spirits, I don't see how we face our struggles. I don't see how we face our hardships. You know, I was talking to my grandmother, and we were having a really good conversation, and we were talking a little bit about faith. And she told me for the first time, you know, I knew that my family, my father's side of the family, had grown up in Chicago, and I think my grandma was 10 in the 50s when they moved to Missouri. But she was telling me that in Chicago, that they grew up as Catholics. Now, I've known a lot of people in my life, but I've never met a black Catholic. But apparently, there are black Catholics, and quite a few of them. You know, I was looking at statistics because as soon as she told me, the very first thing I do, right, is jump down that rabbit hole, right? And so even as of the past couple years, 4% of black people in the United States are Catholic, which is a very, very, very tiny fragment of that population. And 6% of all Catholics are black. But there's not that many black Catholics, but there are places where there were a lot people that just kind of grew up that way. I know there's a lot in New York, Chicago, and then New Orleans. I'm not sure how the New Orleans thing kind of came about, but in the 70s in Chicago, there was like 80,000 black Catholics, which is a large number. But my grandma was talking about, you know, going to a local parish school, and then they went to this black church. I think it was called St. James. And she was talking about this church in the 50s being like an all-black Catholic church. Something I can't even imagine, right? It's not even something that I can't even picture what it would look like, because it's just not something that we typically experience, right? The ties of black history across the board are so deeply ingrained in like Baptist traditions and AME traditions and Pentecostal traditions, and the Catholic strain. It took me by surprise, you know, hearing this from my grandmother. But what she said really shook me is when they moved to Missouri and they started going to a church in the town that I still live in. They went to one of the local Catholic churches, and they experienced a racism that they had never encountered before. And that's the part that kind of shook me a little bit. Because we think of these places, these churches, regardless of the denomination, regardless of really of the religion, right? We think of these sacred, holy places as places where people are treated like the beautiful, sacred creations that they are. And yet, it was that interaction in the church that pushed my grandmother and her family out of the Catholic Church and into what was ultimately a Baptist congregation. And I find it interesting the way that we continue to perpetuate some of that in our society, whether we acknowledge it or not. That there are so many people across all spectrums that have encountered that lack of welcome in our safe spaces. And I'll say again that you can't clean a fish before you get it in the boat. I was working at a church and I went to have a rehearsal with a friend of mine late at night for our college band. And again, I am working at this church on staff for multiple years. And we go after the gym, college kids, hours, so 9, 10 o'clock, maybe, probably 9. I come in the building with a hoodie on. I unlock the doors and I go to the sanctuary and we're setting everything up for this rehearsal. And I see lights in the narthex right outside of the sanctuary. Now, granted, I'm a very nuts and bolts type person. If a light doesn't need to be on because I'm not in the room, it's not going to be turned on. So the whole church is dark except for the few lights that we need in the sanctuary to play. And I see flashlights going in this narthex. And I go out to investigate. Hey, what's going on? Is somebody lost? Is there a light that's malfunctioning or something? And I step out of these doors into this open space, and there's like 4 or 5 police officers. And all of them have weapons out. One of them has a shotgun. The others have pistols, and there's a dog. And they're shining flashlights in my face and pointing guns at me and telling me to get on the ground. In my church, the church that I grew up in, the church that I served on staff in, the church that I was safe, or supposedly so, in. I got on the ground and I followed their requests, and I told them I'm on staff, we're having a rehearsal, and I go through all the hoops. And after 15 or 20 minutes of constant questioning, constant berating, 15 or 20 minutes of not believing me, not trusting my story, me having to affirm things over and over again, showing them that I am indeed on staff, that I do indeed have keys to the building, that my picture is right here on the staff wall, that I do belong in this space, and they, in fact, do not. They finally leave. And it turns out that a non-church related community member, someone who had seen me before over numerous years, someone that was not associated with the church, that was just using the space that we allowed them to use, had called the police when they saw a suspicious brown-skinned man in a hoodie enter the building. And suddenly the space that I grew up in, the space that my faith matured in, the space that I felt called and honored in, wasn't so safe anymore. And every day when I walk past that space, whether I was conscious of it or not, images of what could have been my last moments, well, they flash before my eyes. And even all these years later, when I go into that space, it's hard for my mind not to go back to those moments, to those interactions. And people feel those things. You're not going to tell me that people don't immediately jump forward to the moments where they didn't feel safe, where they didn't feel welcome. And we wonder why we have a church problem in the United States. We wonder why we have a problem with people feeling safe, with people feeling connected, with people feeling like churches have anything on their minds except for the bottom line. The whole reason I started this channel was I wanted to grow. And I wanted to help people grow. And I knew that the only space that we could really do that is in a space where we can be transparent, in a space where we can be honest with one another, and in a space where we can hold each other with love. And it's easy to just jump to the criticisms. It's easy to point out the flaws in everyone around us, because it doesn't require us to take accountability for ourselves. If we really want to have a conversation, if we really want to connect with people, we have to lead with love first. We just do. If we want to bring people to the table, we want to share a meal, if we want to share in something deeper, something more important, then we have to lead with love. The truth is, Jesus sat at a table and he communed with his best friends in the world, his disciples. And one of the people at the table was a man named Judas. And Judas would go on to betray Jesus. He would go on to ultimately stick a knife in Jesus' back. And knowingly contribute to Jesus dying on a cross. And get this, Jesus knew. He knew. He knew what was to come. He knew what Judas was about to do. And still, Judas was welcome at the table. Now, I'm not going to kid you. I don't have the humility of Jesus. I just don't. I don't have the compassion. I don't have the mercy, and I most certainly don't have the grace. But if Jesus could welcome Judas at the table, then I can sit down and share a meal and share conversation and laughter and ultimately share my thoughts and my worries and my fears and my love with someone that doesn't agree with me politically, with someone that doesn't stand on the same moral ground that I do, with someone that I disagree with wholeheartedly. If Jesus could sit at a table with the man that he knows is going to stab him in the back, then I can sit and eat with you. My friends, it's love that stands as the invitation to change. And without the invitation, change doesn't happen. And I'll speak for myself, and I'll say that the last decade has proven time and time again to me that what we're doing isn't working. This place where we firmly entrench these fault lines, you on this side and me on this side, and we just dig ourselves deeper and deeper and deeper, it doesn't work. Not by any stretch of the imagination. It does not work. And if there is to be any hope for you, for me, for any of us, then we have to meet each other with love. You know, Charles Spurgeon has this quote, and it says, "Wisdom is the right use of knowledge. To know is not to be wise. Many men know a great deal and are all the greater fools for it. There's no fool so great a fool as a knowing fool. But to know how to use knowledge is to have wisdom. I can say 100% that I have been a knowing fool in my life. And if you're willing to do a little bit of that reflection, spend a little bit of time inside there, I'm confident that you'll acknowledge that you have been a time or two as well. We've been getting these nuggets of wisdom from people that have come and lived lives of substance for years. And those aren't people that have spent their days bickering. They're not people that have spent more time talking about the faults of others than actually doing something that matters. I wish I could say that we lived in a world where our philosophical debates would actually mean something, but my friends, they don't. They just don't. There are people and communities all around us that are feeling ostracized, that are feeling alone, that are feeling afraid, that are feeling confused, that are feeling hopeless. And I can't sit and just watch as people walk through this life feeling like they're not enough, that somehow they don't have value. Because everyone does. Every one of us, no matter how far we've fallen, no matter how short of expectations we've reached, we matter. And there's hope for all of us. But to call yourself Christian and not be willing to carry the light of God forward, it's a shame. My friends, that's not the life that God called us to live. And so maybe it's time that we allow ourselves to be cloaked in grace. We allow ourselves to carry that light of love forward. And that we allow our unique differences to bring us closer together. That we might knit this fabric of light and peace and ultimately hope for all that's to come in this world. That we might spend less time focused on what separates us and spend more time focused on all that unites us. And maybe that's too optimistic of a vision. But as I sit in this room and I look at a picture of my little boy and my little girl on the wall, I'd be a fool not to be optimistic. I'd be a fool not to pave the way with love for those little ones that walk behind us, for those little ones that model their behavior and their viewpoint of the world on how we choose to live our lives. And if we don't live it with love, then the only people that we're robbing is them. My friends, I want to thank you for tuning into the podcast. I want to thank you for committing yourself to growing, to evolving, and being a part of the change that we all want to see in the world. For it's all that easy and it's all that hard. I hope to see you soon.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We gotta work on the problems. We gotta link up to solve them. We gotta keep on evolving. Gotta be side by side. Give it up. Gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side. Yeah. We gotta be side by side. Gotta be side by side. We gotta be side by side. Everyone. Gotta be side by side. Bye.